I've had Koda for 6 years. 6 years of him sleeping at the foot of my bed, stealing food off the counter when he thinks I'm not looking, and losing his mind every single time someone rings the doorbell. He's a 70-pound shepherd mix with a gray patch on his nose and enough energy to make me feel guilty for sitting still too long. He's not a guard dog. He's not trained for anything serious. He's just my dog. And he knew for almost 2 weeks before I did. I moved into the house in March. It was a rental, a small one-story on the edge of a quiet subdivision, the kind of street where houses are spaced far enough apart that you feel like you have privacy, but close enough that you can still see a neighbor's porch light through the trees. The previous tenants had left in a hurry, according to my landlord, which explained why the carpets hadn't been replaced and why there were still random cabinet shelves missing in the kitchen. I didn't push him on what "in a hurry" meant. It was cheap, it took dogs, and I needed to move fast after my situation in the city fell apart. That was enough. The first week was fine. Koda explored every inch of the place, sniffed every baseboard, claimed the couch on day 2, and by the end of the week he had settled into his usual rhythm, sleeping too much, eating too fast, following me from room to room like my shadow had grown fur. The first thing I noticed, and I really want to be clear that I did not understand what I was noticing at the time, was that Koda stopped sleeping through the night. It started small. He'd been sleeping at the foot of my bed for years without waking me up once, but maybe 5 or 6 days after we moved in, I started waking up at some point in the night to the sound of him moving around the bedroom, not barking, just pacing, standing at the closet door, sniffing along the bottom edge of it. If I called his name, he'd look back at me for a second and then turn back to the closet. I'd get up, open it, hanging clothes, shoes on the floor, nothing, close it again, and go back to sleep. I figured it was the new place, new smells, new sounds the house made at night. I told myself he was adjusting. I told myself that a lot over the next couple of weeks. The second thing was his food bowl. Koda eats fast. Has since he was a puppy, and I've tried everything short of an actual puzzle feeder to slow him down. The point is, he does not leave food in his bowl, except that starting around the end of the first week, he started doing exactly that. He'd eat about half his breakfast, walk away, and go stand in the hallway, facing the kitchen floor. Not toward the back door, not toward the front of the house, just staring down at a section of the hallway floor with his head low and his ears canted forward, like he was listening for something underneath it. I wrote it off. I told myself something had probably scurried through the crawl space beneath the house, and his nose was doing what a dog's nose does. I even called the property management company and asked if there'd been any pest issues. They said no, and that was that. My neighbor 2 doors down, a retired woman named Pat who'd introduced herself the day I moved in, mentioned offhand one afternoon that the family who'd lived in my house before me had a dog too, a big one. She said it the way people say things they're not quite sure they should be saying. I asked her why they'd left, and she told me she didn't know the details. They'd gone quickly, same as what my landlord told me. I asked if they'd mentioned anything about the house before they left. She thought about it for a moment, then said she remembered the wife telling her the dog had gone completely to pieces. Stopped eating, wouldn't sleep, became too anxious to manage. They'd had to rehome him before they moved. I told Pat that was too bad. Then I went inside and thought about it for about 10 seconds and forgot about it entirely. About 10 days after moving in, I came home from work on a Wednesday evening to find Koda in a way I had never seen him before. I work a long day. I leave early, and I'm usually back around 7. When I walked in, Koda didn't meet me at the door. That alone stopped me in the entryway. He always meets me at the door, every single time, without fail, before I've even finished turning the key. I called his name and heard him from the back of the house. When I found him, he was in the far corner of the bedroom, pressed into the junction where 2 walls met, directly opposite the closet. His ears were flat, his body was low, he was shaking, not the nervous, jumpy shaking he does in thunderstorms, but something still and sustained, as if the fear had settled into his bones and was simply living there. I crouched next to him. He didn't move toward me, which he always does. He looked at me once and then looked back at the closet. I walked to the closet and opened it. Hanging clothes, the same shoes, the same clutter along the floor. Nothing. I even got on my knees and looked underneath the hanging items, feeling along the back wall. I knocked on the wall, solid. I pushed on the floor panel at the base. It didn't move. I checked all the doors and windows. Everything was locked. I walked through every room. I found nothing out of place, nothing disturbed, no sign of anything wrong. Koda barely ate that night. He slept beside my pillow instead of at his usual spot at my feet, which he hadn't done since he was very young. I called my friend Jake and told him about it. He said dogs get spooked sometimes. New environments, unfamiliar smells, the house probably settling. He said Koda would level out once he fully adjusted. I laughed and said he was probably right. I slept with the lamp on. A few days later, I found marks on the closet floor I hadn't noticed before. I only found them because Koda spent 20 minutes with his nose pressed to the bottom gap of the closet door that morning, and I got down to look at what he was smelling. In the far back corner of the closet, half hidden under the hem of a jacket, the wooden floor panel had a slight gap along one edge, maybe 1/4 of an inch, and around it, thin parallel scratches in the wood, the kind that come from something being lifted and replaced repeatedly. I told myself it was an old access panel. I told myself the scratches were from before I moved in, probably maintenance, probably nothing. I pressed on the panel, and it shifted slightly, loose in its housing, and then I stood up and closed the closet door and went about my day. I did not open that panel. I want to be honest about that. I could have. I didn't. I don't know exactly why. I think some part of me understood that if I opened it, I would have to deal with whatever I found, and another part of me was not ready to do that. That Saturday, I was up late working at my kitchen table until close to midnight. When I finally turned off the light and headed toward the bedroom, Koda rose up from beside the couch and planted himself in the middle of the hallway. He didn't bark. He didn't move forward. He stood stock still with the hair raised along his spine and his head angled down toward the floor, toward the hallway itself, not the walls, not the doors, toward the floor. I stood behind him in the dark and watched. After about 30 seconds, he broke the stance, shook himself, and went to his bed. I stood there for a long time after that. Then I turned on every light in the house and checked every room. I found nothing. I went to bed and lay awake for a long time listening. The nights were the worst. Some of them would pass normally, and I'd tell myself it had passed, whatever it was. Then 3 or 4 nights in a row, something would set Koda off, and then a few days of quiet, and then it would start again, standing at the closet, sniffing the hallway floor, the raised fur, the unblinking stare directed at surfaces rather than spaces, at the floor and the closet door and the vent panel I'd spotted in the back corner and done nothing about. It had a rhythm. I understood that by the second week, even if I wouldn't say it out loud. It came and it went, on a pattern, like a schedule. 13 days after I moved in, I woke up at 3:10 in the morning, not to barking, to silence, to Koda, standing at the foot of the bed, motionless, staring at the closet door, with every muscle in his body rigid. No sound, just that total stillness that is worse than noise. Because noise means whatever it is hasn't reached you yet, and silence means it's already close. I didn't move. I lay there, and I watched the closet door, and I listened, and then I heard it. From below the closet floor, from beneath the house, a sound. A single, slow, deliberate creak. The kind of creak that wood makes when weight shifts on it. Not the house settling, not a pipe. Weight, shifting, adjusting. The way it sounds when someone who has been holding very still decides to move. Koda made a sound I had never heard from him in 6 years. Not a bark, not a growl. Something lower and more private, pressed out through his teeth. A sound made by an animal that is cornered and has run out of options for retreat. I was out of the bed and my phone was in my hand before I had consciously decided to move. I got out of the bedroom, pulled the door shut behind me, went to the front of the house, and called 911. The operator stayed on with me. I sat on the floor by the front door with my back against the wall, and I did not move until I heard the patrol car pull up 11 minutes later. The officers walked the house. I told them about the closet panel. I told them about the scratches and the loose housing and the 2 weeks of Koda standing at the door pointing at the floor. One of them opened the closet. The other crouched down and pressed on the edge of the floor panel. It lifted, Below it was the access hatch to the crawl space that ran under the house. The officer used his flashlight and didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said my name and asked me to come look. I looked. The crawl space runs the length of the house beneath a dirt floor, low enough that a person would have to move through it on their elbows. Along the far section, the section that runs directly beneath the bedroom, the dirt had been cleared and smoothed and packed down into a body-shaped depression, flat and deliberate, the way you'd prepare a place to lie in. Along the edge of the depression, a torn piece of dark fabric, the kind from a jacket or a bag, snagged on the rough wood above and pressed into the dirt beside it, clean and unmistakable, the outline of a hand. Someone had been lying down there, beneath the bedroom floor, beneath the closet, beneath the bed. Not once. The depression was too settled, too shaped, too worn at the edges for once. They had been down there more than once. The officers searched the property perimeter and found the exterior crawl space access panel on the north side of the house. It was a wooden hatch flush with the foundation. The hasp that should have secured it with a bolt was missing entirely, not forced off, just absent, as though it had been removed cleanly and deliberately long before I moved in. There were faint marks in the dirt along the outside where the hatch swung open. The marks were not new. I stood in my front yard in the middle of the night and tried to process what I was being told. The officer was careful about what he said. He told me they couldn't establish a timeline. He told me the evidence indicated access on multiple occasions. He told me they'd process the crawl space and follow up. He did not tell me, but I understood. They couldn't tell me when it had started. I sat in the living room with every light on while they finished their work, and the thing that kept coming at me, the thing I couldn't push away, was the night I came home and found Koda in the corner of the bedroom, shaking, pressed as far as he could get from the closet, from the panel, from the thing that was 3 feet below the floor. I had walked through that house and found nothing. I had stood in that bedroom and looked around and said nothing, and gone back out to the kitchen to get him to eat. And the whole time there was a person lying in the dark directly beneath the floorboards under my feet, listening to my footsteps move from room to room. Koda had known. He'd been trying, in the only way available to him, to show me exactly where the problem was. The closet door, the hallway floor, the kitchen where his bowl sat over the crawl space. He'd mapped it out for me night after night for nearly 2 weeks. I had opened the closet and looked at the clothes and the shoes and thought nothing. I had watched him press his nose to the floor panel and written it off. I had lain in bed while he stood at that closet and counted myself safe because the doors were locked and the windows were latched, and I'd checked every room. No one had ever used the doors or the windows. I broke my lease that week. The landlord tried to push back, but not very hard. When I found out later from Pat that the previous family had also broken theirs, had left not just suddenly, but after their dog had become too anxious to function, had spent his final weeks refusing to go into the bedroom at all, I understood why my landlord hadn't pushed very hard. I think he knew more than he ever said to me. The police investigation found nothing definitive, no identification, no arrest. Whoever had been underneath my house, underneath my bedroom, had cleared out before or during the response. The case is open. I check occasionally. There is nothing to check. I live somewhere else now. 3rd floor, a doorman in the lobby, no crawl space under anything. Koda sleeps at the foot of the bed every night. He eats his full bowl every morning. He meets me at the door. I think about those 2 weeks more than I should. Not the night I heard the creak, not the moment the officer lifted the hatch. I think about the ordinary nights. The nights I lay in bed with the lamp off, listening to the house settle, thinking everything was fine. The nights Koda stood at the closet door in the dark, and I called his name, and he looked back at me and then looked back at the floor. I think about how small the gap was between us, how thin that floor panel was. He knew from the first week. He had been standing directly above it, sleeping next to it, trying to point me toward it for 13 days. And every morning I watched him and found some other explanation and moved on with my day. There is a version of this story where I open that floor panel when I first find it loose, where I get a flashlight and look down instead of standing up and going about my day. I think about that version sometimes. I don't know what I would have found if I had looked. I'm not sure I want to know. What I do know is that the night I moved into that house, something had already found us. Koda understood it inside of a week. He was telling me in the only language he had, pointing at floors and closet doors and the spaces between things, night after night after night. I just didn't know how to listen to what he was saying. By the time I learned, someone had been sleeping beneath my bed, and I still don't know how many times.